Chad Budrow, the Executive Director at the Academy of Model Aeronautics, and you'll notice we have the leadership team here to include Senior Director of Government Affairs, Tyler Dobbs, and AMA President, Rich Hansen. Thank you all for joining. I'm going to play the role of MC and help guide this conversation, but before we get started, I want to give the floor to Rich, our President. Rich?
Sure, thank you, Chad. And more importantly, thank you to all of you that are listening in, that serve as volunteers for this organization. You're truly what we call the tip of the spear. And we couldn't have the successes that we've had without you. And your participation today certainly shows your interest and your commitment. So once again, thank you for being here. You're probably aware of what we're going to be talking about today, as we've been talking about since 2008, government relations and the impact of federal regulations on our hobby. And most of the news over those years have been good news, but it has been an ebb and flow situation where times we've gone down one path and come to a dead end and had to go down another path. But for the most part, we've been moving forward. And you might remember that way back when I was sitting in Tyler's seat, my approach was to make sure that model aviation continued to exist pretty much the way it did back when we started flying model aircraft, and that the impact of the regulations would be as minimal as possible. And I think that is true when you go out to the flying field today and look at what it takes to put your airplane in the air. Is pretty much the same as what we've been doing, with some exceptions with some of the administrative requirements that's now been put onto us. Now, as we go through the federal regulations issues, every 4 years, Congress takes a look at FAA and they write what's called a Reauthorization Act, which sets the tone for the FAA for the next 4 years and adjusts regulations to allow for changes in technology, for changes in the industry, and for shortcomings that may have been shown in the previous years. And that's where we're at today. This is actually the third go-around of reauthorization since we've been in this process. And this fall, the Congress will be looking at doing another reauthorization. And what we're doing is providing input to Congress to once again meld over the roads and to try and resolve some of the issues that we found in the current set of regulations. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to what is truly our subject matter expert, Tyler, and give you the lowdown.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Chad. And as Chad and Rich have both mentioned, we're here to discuss the current legislative status for the rules that we follow as recreational model aircraft operators. As some of you probably know, a few weeks back, both the House and the Senate released their draft version of the current FAA reauthorization. The last one that was passed was in October of 2018. Prior to that was in 2012, and obviously those authorizations from the 2018 bill are ready to expire here soon, so both chambers will need to reauthorize the agency. This year, the baseline bill, I'll call it, in both the House and the Senate is moving us in the right direction. It's not overly burdensome compared to where we currently are, and it gains back some of the freedoms that we've enjoyed in the past. If you look at both bills, they both put a process in place to allow us to fly above 400 feet in Class G airspace. That's been a long process that we've been working on with the FAA, and we can go through and get waivers and for sanctioned events and so forth. This is a little bit more definitive, and it would allow for day-to-day ops above 400 feet going through that FAA process. It also clarifies some large model aircraft language that has been troublesome in some scenarios. It provides funding for Know Before You Fly campaign, which is certainly good. That just previous funding just allowed AMA to get 2,500 UAS into classrooms and do some STEM curriculum there. So that's important. It also includes an educational provision that allows elementary and primary and secondary schools to fly through the recreational programming. That's important. Previous language did not allow for that, and this cleans that up. So all in all, the bill, where we're starting, we're in pretty decent shape. Like I said, much better than the current language that we're required to follow. That being said, this is our opportunity for most likely the next 5 years. This bill, it will likely be a 5-year bill like the last one was. It could have been a 1 or 2 or 3, usually not a 1, but it can be various lengths of time. This one will likely be 5 again, so we want to get as much as we can get. And so our work isn't done. We're happy that we were able to get this language in the baseline bills. It is a step in the right direction. However, we have amendments filed in both the House and the Senate that go even further. The amendments would allow everyone flying under 44809 and following the programming of AMA to fly up to controlled airspace, regardless where you are. If you're in your backyard, if you're in a fixed flying site, anywhere that's a safe location, and anywhere that you're following safety guidelines, you would be permitted to do so. So that's an important distinction. The baseline bill does have a process to allow you to fly higher. Unfortunately, the FAA is going to develop that process. Will we be able to work through it? Most likely, but it will be lengthy. It will take a lot of resources, and we'll probably, get the same outcome as if we just changed the law to allow for those operations to take place without that FAA process in place. So that's a real distinction that needs to be made. Baseline bill, we have to go through a process and put in requests. AMA's amendments would allow you to fly above 400 feet up to 700 or 1,200 feet, depending on your location, without those requests, without going through any process. In addition, it would allow AMA and other CBOs to self-declare FAA-recognized identification areas, or FRIAs. That's huge. We're currently putting in our applications for FRIA requests. That's a long, lengthy process. It's going to probably be a longer, lengthy process for the FAA to go through and approve and deny these. So if AMA can self-declare these FRIAs, that saves resources of both AMA and resources of the FAA. So we certainly hope that gets included. The last provision of the amendments requires that CBO be a trust administrator. AMA is a trust administrator. Congress wants some additional educational and safety requirements on CBOs, and they thought that trust was one way to accomplish both. Trust, educates the general public that there are some basic rules that everyone needs to follow, and it includes some safety guidelines through that process, so they added that. So basically, our amendments, which were filed by, in the House, it was Congressman Yackham and Congresswoman Titus. Yackham is from Indiana and Titus from the Las Vegas area. And in the Senate, Senator Todd Young of Indiana, both those amendments were filed, same language in both, but it makes a drastic difference between the baseline bill and what could be in the final bill.
So Tyler, we're as a reminder to everyone watching, I'm monitoring comments, so I'm going to throw some questions out your way. As they're coming in, let's unpack what you just shared.
Okay.
That's a lot.
Yeah,
to
that's
take
a lot
in.
of information, and there's a lot more. Unfortunately, it's hard to simplify, so we'll do our best.
So as we understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, the base language is good.
Base language is good. It's not perfect by any means, but it is much better than where we currently are. It puts a process in place to get above 400 feet, provides some educational provisions, provides some funding to educate the general public, and starts us off in a much better position than where we
But
currently
we're not satisfied with good.
We are not.
And as you mentioned, our next opportunity may not be for another 5 years.
That's right.
So let's try to make as much of a meaningful impact as possible. So many of you at 1 o'clock today should have received an email, and if you haven't, it's still heading out, and that is a congressional call to action. And that's what this roundtable's about. We want to make sure you understand why we're doing a congressional call to action. I want to make sure you understand all the questions, all the nuances, why we're doing this, what the specific asks are about. So if you have questions as it relates to legislation, let's unpack those here. I do see some remote ID and FRIA questions. We'll get to that too. But I want to make sure everyone understands the legislation. And you mentioned the amendment talks about making some changes to FRIA. First of all, can you explain what is FRIA and what's that change again?
Sure. So FRIA is a FAA recognized identification area, and it is one of the three paths that allow you to satisfy the remote ID rule. Starting in September of this year, September 16th, you'll need to comply with remote ID in one of three ways. Either you buy an aircraft with remote ID built in, you purchase an add-on broadcast module, or you fly at a site that the FAA has granted authorization to fly at without the other two, without the standard ID or the broadcast module. So it's an AMA site essentially, or a site that is dedicated to model aircraft or UAS operations that the FAA recognizes. They'll place that site on the UAS facility map to let the public knows that it's there, and anyone flying there would then be able to do so without broadcasting a signal from their aircraft.
I might just add one thing to that, just to help clarify it a little bit. FRIAs and AMA sites are distinct differences. They're not one and the same.
Right.
You can be an AMA flying site without being a FRIA. You can be a FRIA without being an AMA flying site, although not necessarily within the AMA program, but within the national context of the national flying airspace. So if you were, for some reason, unable to get FRIA status for your flying site, that doesn't mean you would lose your flying site. It just means that you would then have to operate with a remote ID module or a remote ID equipped aircraft. So FRIAs are really related to remote ID more so than identification of what we commonly refer to as an AMA flying site.
Yeah, good point, Rich. And I think that, to go back to the amendments, I think that's why it's so important that organizations like AMA can self-declare these sites. We know the importance of FRIAs, and we know the headache it is to go through the application process. So being able to self-declare would make things much easier on not only AMA headquarters, but the clubs and the people who are going through this process.
And I think that answers John from CMAC his question. He's going through the process, as many of the club leaders on this call are, and it's a lengthy process. You submit the application, and we provide feedback, and you provide feedback. We send it to the FAA. The FAA may have further questions. This streamlines that. We want to make it as easy as possible for you to continue flying as you always have. And one way to do that is at a FRIA, where you can fly and bring your models as you always have and continue enjoying the hobby as you always have without additional equipment. Tyler, talk about the timeline. So we have bills. We're now pushing amendments. What's next?
We do. So the House, the committee that drafted their version in the House, the Transportation and Infrastructure in the House, has passed their draft out of committee. It was a 63-0 vote. It now goes on to eventually be voted on in the floor. The Senate was going to do their markup, similar to how the House did, and vote it out of committee so that it could go to the floor as well. Unfortunately, there's been a hang-up there. There's some full-scale issues that some senators are trying to negotiate related to training hours of pilots, and that has stalled Senate work, stalled Senate markup on FAA reauthorization. We hope that gets worked out soon and moves forward. That being said, eventually the House and the Senate will both vote this bill out of the floor. They will come together in a conference committee, and the two bills will essentially become one. The House bill's almost 800 pages. The Senate bill's about 400. So there's some differences there. Our sections are relatively similar. There's some nuances here and there, but for the most part, the most important aspects of our provision in both bills are the same, which is good news. Hopefully there won't be any surprises that come out of conference committee. But once that bill is conferenced, then we get one bill. The bill will go to both chambers, be re-voted on, and if passed, then it will be signed and turned into law. Because of the FAA bill and what it means, I mean, the FAA is a safety agency and a safety organization. It's very important that their reauthorization happen. It will happen. We just aren't sure when. If it doesn't happen when it needs to in October of this year, there will be what's called continuing resolutions. And that's essentially where they say, okay, we can't agree on this, or the Senate's still hung up on some amendments and some language. Let's pass a short-term bill to get them through for the next month or 2 months or 3 months. And that can happen numerous times. I know back when I think Rich and Chad were working on FAA reauthorization, there was something where there was like 26 continuing resolutions passed before a final bill came out. So it's pretty limitless on how many times they can kick the can down the road. That being said, there aren't any huge issues, so we do hope, and we're trying to stay cautiously optimistic that we can get a bill out in a timely manner this year. We think it's important. We're starting in a very good place, and the amendments that we have out do add quite a bit to the bill and make things easier for everyone.
So Tyler, you mentioned the bill is well over the two bills, the House and Senate combined, are over 1,000 pages. So there's a lot in there. Paul asks a question: what about the environmental impact assessments? Is that included in the bill? What's the language? So the exact question is, how have the environmental impact assessments gone? Are they still ongoing? What sites were chosen? Is this discussed?
So it is discussed in the Senate bill. They have a section in there that basically Congress mandates that the FAA take a look at NEPA and the National Environmental Protection Act reviews that are required on UAS, and essentially create a section that get its categorical exclusion. Because the impact is so light, it doesn't really have an impact. And because of that, I think that's relatively obvious for most. Congress has said, we understand that maybe not all UAS should fall under this categorical exclusion, but certainly a large portion should. So take a look at that portion, create that category when we move forward. Now, AMA, we've been aware of the NEPA review for FRIAs for a couple years now. We actually invited the FAA and the group that does these assessments and collects data on noise and the environmental impact to a flying site around the DC area a year or two ago, and collected all this data so our clubs wouldn't have to. I know that we've heard a lot of noise out there on forums and others that every flying site's going to have to go through one of these reviews. That is not the case. There could be a handful, and I'm not even sure if a handful that could be too much. I think it will be probably none, but theoretically there could be a handful of sites that have to have some sort of environmental review just because of the location that they're at, or maybe they do something different than the norm. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any, but it's a theoretical possibility. But that being said, we have collected enough data and determined that model aircraft operations pose such a small impact to the environment that those assessments just aren't needed. So the reason that we're not seeing FRIAs approved is that NEPA review document had to be published to the Federal Register, which it was on May 3rd. The FAA gets 60 days to adjudicate any public comments, which there were a few, not many. But after that 60-day period is up, then the FAA can start approving these FRIA sites. I know that we've heard that there's been some denials from multiple organizations and submissions. They can deny all they want. They can't approve until they meet that 60-day deadline. So we do expect, once that deadline hits, which I think is around July 3rd, it may be after since we have the 4th of July the following day, but sometime in July we do expect for approvals to start rolling in. So that's certainly good news.
You know, just to add to that, the NEPA process obviously is something they have to look at. That's in law that they're required to do whenever they write new regulations. But, you know, environmental impact is not something that hasn't been looked at with model aircraft for decades. Yeah. We have model aircraft fields that are next to wildlife sanctuaries, that are next to bird sanctuaries, next to equestrian properties. And over time, we've had that question come up. Whether or not model aircraft actually impact these environments. And to my knowledge, to date, there's never been one that has proven to be an impact.
Right.
So I do want to spend some time on this meeting to talk about how you all can help mobilize our members and help champion for these amendments, and of course the base language. But There are a few more questions I want to get through and make sure everyone's on the same page. And one comes from John. And that is, are there any members of the House or Senate who are hostile to AMA suggested amendments?
Hostile, no. We we could get some opposition from some in the House. When I think Chad's right, I think we at least need to mention, we did send out a call to action. I know it was briefly discussed, but we sent a call to action to our members just moments ago or an hour ago saying, hey, contact your congressional representative and let them know that they should support the Representative Yakam and Titus amendment in this year's FAA reauthorization. And that is critical and important, and we need that language in. So as soon as you get done watching this video, please go open your email or go to modelaircraft.org/advocacy and take that action. Because we do have some in the House who are pushing back and just saying, look, we gave you something close. You can go through these FAA processes and you can get essentially the same thing, which they're probably not wrong, but we don't want to wait another 2 or 3 years. We've been waiting 5 years and going through multiple processes, safety risk management panels in controlled airspace, letters of agreement in controlled airspace, FRIA applications, and this is just one more process that's going to be added to it. One more group that's going to have to, collect data and submit it to the FAA, and the FAA turnover is, every single month or every couple of months we get a new group in and we have to re-educate them on how the processes even work. And it's not feasible and it's not sustainable. Not only just for us, but for the FAA. Bringing a group in whenever they have new hires and they bring new groups in, it backlogs us 3 months as we try to bring them up to speed on the current processes. That shouldn't be our focus as a community-based organization working to educate the FAA. We should be working to educate newcomers to the hobby and beginners. So what we're trying to urge Congress is we understand that we'll likely end up in the same position, whether it's through an FAA process or if you just grant the CBOs the authority to allow these things to take place. But let us do our jobs in educating the general public and working to keep the airspace safe rather than spending all those resources trying to bring the FAA up to speed on how these things work. So I do expect some pushback from the House side of things. In the committee, I think it's important that we share our concerns with Congressman Larson, Congressman Cohen. Larson is with Washington. He's got a district in Washington State. Cohen has a district in Tennessee. Those two are going to be important. Keep in mind, you reach out as a constituent, they will listen to what you have to say. If you just reach out to someone who doesn't represent you, an email will be filtered out through their system and a phone call will be going into a deaf ear. So we really need constituents in those districts to reach out and get their voices heard.
So there are some questions getting into modules and FRIAs. If we have time, and I think we will, I do want to get into those. So we will circle back, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page with the language and the amendments. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and this effort is focused to the House. In the Senate, we have some commitments that our amendment will be added in a manager's package, which is great news. Essentially, a manager's package is just that. The person who's managing the draft of the bill, they put together a bunch of amendments from various representatives or senators, and that gets put forward all in one lump sum, and it usually passes very easily, usually unanimous, just often by voice vote even. So being in that manager's package in the Senate is great news. As long as negotiations don't fall through or we get delayed, that puts us in a very good spot for the Senate amendment.
So I'm going to ask a question from Andy Argenio, which is, what is AMA's position on UTM in the bill? And I'll say kind of tongue-in-cheek, Andy, I'll be asking you that question as our executive counsel. So maybe instead of what's AMA's position on UTM, Tyler, can you talk a little bit about what is UTM and just give a quick highlight what's discussed in the bill about UTM?
Sure. So the FAA is mandated in the bill to begin testing and developing a UTM system, an unmanned traffic management system. And essentially it is just what it sounds like. It's like air traffic for full-scale aircraft where things are tracked and monitored. The same thing would occur with unmanned aircraft, especially beyond visual line of sight. We do have some concerns about the UTM system. We have some concerns about network remote ID. We can see good and we can see bad, but what we don't want is wrapped up in a lot of additional requirements. We are very low risk on the spectrum, the lowest risk that is out there. We should not have to meet the same levels of responsibility as beyond visual line of sight operators. So that's what our message will be when we go to congressional offices. You likely won't see a public push against any of these things. There are a number of organizations that are favorable and they're in support of these things moving forward. And what we don't need is a lot of commercial groups coming back against AMA and recreational and educational language that we're putting forward. So we will be opposing some things, when we go to meetings and we meet with offices. I don't see us opposing things publicly, and certainly not pushing back against anybody who would be pushing for some of these requirements in the bill. We will get our chance to get exclusions and fights as things get put forward, as rulemaking processes go. The likelihood of a success in getting something like that removed from this bill is next to zero. So work through the processes the best we can, make it known that we have concerns now, make it known that our operations are much different than commercial and beyond line of sight operations. And then as things move forward through the rulemaking process and as the FAA and things get outsourced to developers, then we work with those groups to make sure that we are not included.
FAA and NASA and even the international community through ICAO has been working on UTM for over a decade now. And I don't think anyone really has the solution as yet. But the challenge is to figure out how you have what they call interoperability of aircraft, dissimilar aircraft, in a high-density area. And as Tyler says, in our case, especially at our flying fields where we're static as far as its interaction with that community, it really is not a problem. I think the only area of our hobby that could be challenged is where you go out and find your own safe flying site and you become pop-up traffic in a UTM environment. I've seen several different models that have addressed that, but almost all of them have some network component to it so that you announce yourself to that system that you're operating in a given location. But they're a long ways away from solving that problem.
So I do want to get into some tactical asks of you all and some tips and recommendations on how we can mobilize our members. I think maybe one question I want to ask to you, Tyler, is this is a lot to unpack.
It is.
And you're well versed. You're saying things like 8809 and UTM and language that a lot of our members probably can't just roll off the tongue because they don't live and breathe this daily like you and your team do. Could you give a quick elevator pitch? If there's a club officer sitting at a club meeting or a SIG leader or a CD doing a quick pilots meeting, what's a quick message that they could share to their members?
Sure. So I think the most important thing you can share with your members is to take action. You've already gotten an email. It's sitting in your inbox if you haven't already taken action and seen it. It's on modelaircraft.org in numerous places, on the advocacy page that I shared. It's going to be on a slider. We've created a blog. You're going to see it on social media. You need to take action. The offices need to hear from us to make it known that we want these changes. If your congressional representative doesn't get any emails and they're the deciding vote on whether this goes through or not, then what's their incentive to say, yeah, go ahead and let those folks do that, or let's push this amendment through. Nobody in their district is interested in it, obviously, because nobody sent an email or nobody's making a phone call. So take action through an email. If you don't want, we've already had a couple phone calls that said, I don't want to enter my contact information on this site. That's fine. A simple Google search will get you to your congressional representative's office and phone number and address. Mail a letter, pick up the phone, and just say, hey, AMA has this initiative going on. They're working with Congressman Yackham. They're working with Congresswoman Titus. Please support those amendments as they get pushed through. It's important to the hobby. The difference is a lengthy process where people may be waiting months or years to get approval to fly above 400 feet, or something where when the bill gets passed, we can do it the next day. I think that's an important distinction, and one that if you don't fly at a fixed flying site, that's important as well. We don't know what this FAA process is going to look like. It may be one set of requirements for a group who wants to fly at a fixed flying site. Maybe that's easy, but maybe if you want to make that same request in your backyard, then you get denied, or it's a much lengthier process. So don't just sit on your hands and say, hey, Tyler and the group said that we're in much better shape than we would be, even if nothing else gets through. It's true, but we could be in much, much better shape, and we could secure these freedoms for people who aren't just flying at fixed flying sites, and I think that's an important distinction.
But Tyler, have we talked about the timeline that we need to get this done?
We really haven't. I think that we don't want to sit on our hands. I think if you and your club could get something sent in the next 2 weeks, that would be great. Senate could wrap up, their dispute right now. I mean, as soon as we get done with this video, the Senate could say, okay, we worked out a deal, and markup starts and a vote happens in the next few days, and now we've got 2 bills that are ready to get to the floor for a vote. They could try to push this thing out before the August recess. My gut tells me that's not going to happen, but still, let's not take that chance. I know that a lot of club meetings happen the first of the month, so first of the month, this should be topic number 1. Hey, is everybody here taking action on those amendments that AMA talked about in this video? And if not, pause the meeting, everybody get on their phone, do it, and then you guys can get back to talking. But this is important. We have, if this bill gets passed soon, we're going to have 5 years to wait before we get additional changes. So think about that. We don't want to wait another length of time like we did from 2018.
And I would say that information should go out via their Facebook pages, their web pages, as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And they can get that information right off the AMA webpage and cut and paste that information onto their webpage.
That's exactly a good point, Rich. And we'll be sending you some graphics that you can use. Our staff have created graphics you can plug and chug. You put it right on your social media page, in your newsletters, use on your club websites or SIG websites with a link to modelaircraft.org/advocacy. And our staff was showing you some of those screenshots earlier. It'll take you straight to that page where our members can take action, which leads me to the next question. I'm glad Jane Marsh brought this up. Who can take action? Is this only for members?
No, anybody can take action. If you fly recreationally under U.S. Code 44809, which is the group of folks that fly without a Part 107 certificate and within the programming of AMA or another CBO, then you are going to benefit from this amendment. And so you should take action. Please send a letter, send the message that we put together if you'd like. If not, develop a message and just say, hey, I watched an AMA video and I understand there's an amendment that's been introduced that Congressman Yackham and Congresswoman Titus put forward, and it has got some good things in it, and as my congressional representative, I hope you support it too. It's as simple as that. Pick up the phone, say a few words, and let them know to support that amendment, and that goes a long way.
Sure. It doesn't have to be model airplane enthusiasts either.
No, it doesn't.
I mean, if you have a community group within your location that supports you, get the word out to them too.
Absolutely.
They can help you get that through.
Yeah. These provisions will not be AMA specific. Everybody will get to enjoy them if passed. So everybody should take part in getting this pushed through.
So a question is, will AMA be sending out talking points on these amendments? Yes. We just had a quick discussion earlier today about a follow-up email to this group where we will provide links to those graphics that you can use, talking points, maybe some frequently asked questions. We want to make sure you're armed and prepared to help mobilize our members and answer questions. As Rich said, you're the tip of the spear. We know often you're first approached at a club meeting or an event, and we want to make sure you're armed. So we will send that. I don't want to promise it'll be by end of today, but that's what we're working towards definitely tomorrow.
Right.
With those resources.
Yeah, I think, here soon we're finishing up some of those things. We've created a blog post. The amendments are online if you want to review those. They're just how they're written, the nature of how they're written. It's a little confusing. It talks about deleting some lines and adding additions to other lines. That just because the amendments are to the Some are to the base bill that was just introduced in the House and Senate, and some changes are to U.S. Code 44809, which was passed in 2018. So it's a little wonky when you read through it, but you can see the additions in. You can fly up to controlled airspace. You can self-declare, CBOs can self-declare FRIAs, and CBOs are required to be trust administrators. Those are the three takeaways from each amendment.
So I think we're at a point where we may change gears. There are a couple questions just about remote ID and modules. But before we shift gears, anything else either of you want to discuss about these amendments and our language in Congress? And I'll continue monitoring questions. If you have questions, by all means, I'll bring it up. But I want to give you two the floor.
Well, I don't think I have any more to add. I mean, certainly we're looking to this group to take on the initiative to get the word out. And we appreciate what you've done for us and what you always do for us, and we're looking forward to a successful campaign.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Yeah. Thank you in advance. I know that this group will follow through and take action. This will be ever-changing and evolving day to day, so if we need to gather you folks again and give an update, we're happy to do so. We hope that this will be the only campaign that's needed this year, but that's not a guarantee. Something could get added to a bill that we oppose. It would make things, difficult to continue doing what we're doing, or, there's another push that's needed to get something added, and so continue to monitor emails and social media for that. Again, we hope this is the only action we have to take, but it's not a guarantee.
I do have another question. Chad, will this video be available to them if they want to replay it at a club meeting or something?
Yes, this video will be available on demand. And this is short notice. We sent out the invite late yesterday. So I know many people will be watching this later because they could not attend this 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time session. So yes, it's available for on-demand viewing.
Good.
And we'll send an email with this link as a reminder where you can access this link to the entire leadership group again, as well as links to the assets and other talking points. With that, I'm going to shift gears just very briefly and talk about remote ID. And we have one question, given the sparse selection of remote ID modules right now, and that FRIAs aren't approved yet, is it likely the September deadline might be delayed? Now, we're shifting gears. This isn't necessarily addressed in the legislative or part of the advocacy campaign, but since we're together, let's highlight a few questions such as this.
Yeah, sure. I don't think so. There are modules available. There's multiple modules available, and there's more that are receiving their declaration of compliance on a fairly regular basis. As Chad mentioned, Andy Argenio leads up our tech committee, and we've had meetings with multiple developers and been working through that process. We've tested a few of these. We've had a couple others, developers last week, reach out and ask if we wanted to test theirs, which we were going to do. So I think on the module side, there's some available. You can purchase those. The prices are coming down on some of those as well. So that's certainly good news. In regards to FRIAs, the delay is the NEPA document that was published to the Federal Register. That's the only reason why we're not seeing approvals. The FAA team that is going through these approvals and denials and the application process just put 38 people on that team. So there's going to be 38 people within the FAA approving these FRIA applications. I think they're going to be moving very quickly once they get the go-ahead in that January date, or July date, I'm sorry.
And I want to thank Andy and others on that committee, Tony Stillman. I've considered myself rather somewhat tech savvy, but they are taking it to a whole new level. They're breaking down the components. They're really understanding the pros and cons of each device, which leads me to the next question, which is on the modules that we are going to be required to fly at a non-FRIA field. Is AMA going to provide any recommendations or a list of remote ID module providers?
I can't say that we'll recommend any, but we will be sharing the ones that are available. I know that some have asked for reviews, so we'll share, how they've worked, how they, the functionality of them. If we had any issues when we ran the modules through the paces and so forth. I know that Matt Ruddick and Tony Stillman and I went outside with one about a month ago, and I believe that Tony's going to do a write-up on that here soon. So we'll be sharing information like that, how they function, and any issues that we found with the devices. As far as recommendation goes, I think that would likely be a council decision.
All right. Well, I appreciate everyone's time. The comments are starting to slow down. The main message I want to convey is thank you for your help, and we're asking for your help again in helping our members make a clear message to Congress that we appreciate the language, but we need to go further. Now's our chance to go further. Go to modelaircraft.org/advocacy and contact your legislators to pass AMA's amendments and AMA's language in the original bills. I want to give the floor to Tyler, and then I'm going to ask Rich to close the meeting. Tyler, anything you want to add as we wrap up this roundtable?
Sure. Just, again, take action through your email or the site that Chad just mentioned. Well, we will start follow-ups with congressional offices. I fly into D.C. Myself and the government affairs team here at AMA will be in D.C. all next week and multiple weeks after, hitting as many offices as we possibly can to push these amendments. So you will be well represented there. If we may pick up a phone and call a specific member or club if we need some additional push in an office. I know I just did that to a club in Washington State yesterday afternoon. I've reached out to the club contacts. So don't be surprised if you get a call from myself or someone on the government affairs team asking for some additional push from your side of things. Again, this is ever-changing, and we'll keep you updated as best we can. If we don't share information, then that's because it's changing so rapidly that we want to ensure that we're getting you the correct information. What we don't want to do is have, you know, multiple messages going out and none of them are going the same direction. So just keep an eye on your emails and AMA social media, modelaircraft.org/advocacy, and we'll do our best to update you.
Rich?
Well, yeah, I guess just in closing, I'll add my thanks as well for everything you guys do to support the hobby, support the AMA, to support your fellow modelers. But probably more importantly, as far as something to do is go out there and fly your model airplane. Have a great time. We're just getting into the 2023 peak flying season. Remember, we're going to be celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Nats this summer. We've got a lot of both events going on here at the IAC as well as events across the country. So get out there, have a great time, have a great day of flying.
With that, I appreciate the time all and appreciate all your help. Have a good rest of the day.
Thanks.